case of an emergency. But new data from last November to this April shows that police forces in England and Wales are failing us in that potentially life or death moment. With calls not answered within target times, nearly 3 million calls a year are not being answered within the target of 10 seconds. 500,000 calls are not being picked up before what must be a very chilling 60 seconds. And officers are taking 3 minutes longer on average to arrive at serious incidents than they were in 2016, from 11 minutes to 14 minutes. Michael, I'm going to come to you. Now, some of these call centre delays are apparently because the emergency call operators, are still working from home.
Yeah, well, it's we're going to find it issue after issue. It's another legacy of lockdown, and this has been mentioned in the reports as a concern, as a hangover from lockdown. Also related to that is the fact I think some forces are reporting that up to 30% of calls now are mental health related, which I would argue is, another unfortunate outcome and hangover from what we saw with lockdown. What I would say about this, though, is, it's good that we've got this degree of accountability. It's good that we've got these figures. It's good that it's being mentioned. I think at a time when people are generally seeing their taxes jacked up, this sort of stuff, which is, let's face it, a matter of life or death, this saves lives, fast responses times. Perhaps it's time for a little bit less virtue signalling and spending on social media teams and a bit more getting the basics right, like this.
Peter Edwards, let me come to you next, if I may. Have you had any experiences recently with the emergency services? What do you bring to this conversation? You obviously will say that the government are just doing a bad job all round. But what specifically has gone wrong in this area?
Well, I suspect, like many of your viewers, I've had a few delays, nothing too serious, just minor altercations in London where someone doesn't like the cut of your jib and you ring for help, and one is always a bit surprised at the wait. I always accept there's often many people in much greater danger than I am, but I think to broaden it out beyond individual cases, these things, a bit like cost of living, they don't come out of nowhere. And we heard this week about enormous pressure on ambulance services and queuing up in in hospital car parks, which has obviously been happening for years. Of course, a pandemic could put a huge pressure on public services, but we've also had an era of austerity under successive Conservative Prime Ministers. And if you think about problems on the trains, problems for ambulances getting into hospitals, GP waiting times, police answering calls, these go well beyond the pandemic. The roots of this are a decade. Some of them go back to decisions taken by David Cameron and George Osborne. And to me, it has that feel a bit like the mid-late 90s when we're in the dying days of the Conservative administration and we were told that comprehensive schools were falling apart. Britain's infrastructure has been weakened, I hope not permanently, by a Conservative government.